Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and boy do I have something super exciting for you here today. This is update 0.7.5 and I am playing in 2012 on my main account in arguably my favorite tank of all time. This is the M48A1 Patton. And yeah, I know it took me a few years to not call it the M48A1 Patton when Wargaming changed the name to the M48A5 Patton, but today it feels good to be playing this vehicle instead. So, similar to the video that I made a while ago where I was playing a T10, which was called the IS-8 back in the day, all of those kind of features are the same in World of Tanks right now. We have 350 heat pen that was eventually nerfed down to 330. Everything is different about this game. The outlinings are different. The T-34 is, I guess it's still a premium tank because it was adjusted from being a tier 9 heavy. This video today is all about the M48A1 and why it was arguably the most overpowered tank patch for patch. Now, this tank was only introduced in update 0.7.5, which came out on the 1st of August 2012. However, Wargaming then nerfed this vehicle just one patch later. That's right, in 8.0, which was arguably the greatest patch of all time, not because they nerfed the M48A1 Patton, but because that's when they added the physics into the game. Before then, you couldn't actually push anyone around the battlefield, and you couldn't go over steep edges. You could go down slopes, but you couldn't go over steep edges as Wargaming put invisible walls all around the map that you couldn't be able to progress against. And that patch came out on the 27th of September 2012. So pretty much for Halloween, Wargaming gave us physics, and they also made gold rounds available for credits. And that's why you see that I'm using no gold rounds here. And I had no idea that the gold rounds on this vehicle were 350 heat, because I never fired a single gold round in all of the 500 games that I played in this patch. Yeah, I know. Even though this tank was only in this crazy form that it is now for 50 days, I was so into World of Tanks in 2012. I think I played about 2,000 games of World of Tanks in 50 days. I know, right? I guess I need a life. To be fair, it was probably more like 57 days. That probably helps out the metrics a little bit. But I loved the M48A1 Patton, and I love playing the T110E4. They both came out in that patch, and really, those new tanks is where I think I changed from being somebody who was just interested in World of Tanks as to somebody who was like really loving the game, and somebody who really wanted to invest some time in getting better and trying to learn the game. That's why I'm in the clan, first in, last out, the only clan that I've pretty much ever been a part of in all of the history that I've played World of Tanks. So the M48A1 Patton, why was it so good? Because it was just this incredible vehicle that had amazing gun handling. And you see, when I turn this tank's reticle, it doesn't even really seem to bloom out all of that much. And this vehicle also had as good, if not better, damage per minute than it has now. In this patch, I think it was firing like 7.5 rounds a minute. That doesn't sound impressive for 2023 World of Tanks, but compared to all of the other vehicles, it really was. And when you got like a gun rammer, you got vents on this thing, you whacked on some vert stabs because it always had good view range and never really needed to use vert stabs. And especially with the incredible gun handling that this vehicle had back in the day, you definitely didn't need vert stabs on this tank. It really was just this all-round monster vehicle. It still looks fairly similar to what it does now, just no HD. Even though I am playing with all of the graphics turned on, and I don't think my potato PC could play with all of the graphics turned on and still be able to get the same kind of frame rate that I have. A little known story you may know is that my first YouTube video I actually made of World of Tanks, I made playing the game in the replay at half speed, so then I could speed it up 2 times using the editing program that I was using to be able to actually get 30 frames, because my computer was so bad that I could only get about 15 frames a second when I was recording video. So 5-head QuickyBabs there, recording in half speed at 15 frames and then doubling it to get 30 frames for his first ever YouTube video. So, you know, your hardware is what you make of it, right? And I definitely have been in periods of gaming where I've had to try and squeeze out the most possible from my hardware, overclocking my CPUs and so on and so forth. But I digress. Let's focus on the game at hand. And that is that, like, I don't really feel that too much has changed. I've gone into the same positions, and whenever I watch myself play from 11 years ago, it's a very surreal experience to be able to do this. That you can, I noticed that I still go into that early position, and I go and try and get shots over towards these, and I still find myself doing that now when I'm playing a vehicle like the M48A1 Patton, which is now known as the A5 Patton. Man, it's just so crazy just looking how everyone felt like they were just so much worse at this game than they are now. You very rarely get so many players who just seem to be not knowing where you are. And that's because of features that modifications added that then became default inside the game. Do you notice how on the minimap we don't see any of the positions that tanks who are not spotted are? We don't know where one of the heavies is, for example, and we don't even know which heavy is in what position unless we can like turn our mouse and take a look to see which one is where. Also, the render distance in this game is different back in the day. It isn't actually a circle on the minimap, it's a square. So that actually means that you can see further to the due southeast and due southwest, and northeast and northwest respectively, than you can towards the east, because it was actually just a square on the minimaps. There's so many things that are just so different about this game back in the day. I must say a massive thank you to everyone who left a comment in my 2012 World of Tanks is Insane video, because you came up with so many memories and it felt so good. And I would love all of you to pitch in again in the comments down below, because it looks like a lot of you are fairly nostalgic for this kind of like old school remastered World of Tanks gameplay. And look how big the explosions and all the flashes are and the smoke is back in the day as well. That's what somebody brought up. So this game, it's probably one of the, I think it could be still to this day the most damage I've ever dealt in an M48A1 Patton. I'm not going to spoil whether we're going to be able to take this one down, but I was feeling pretty confident. Unfortunately, that T110E5 definitely caught me there, and I'm a bit worried about the IS-4 hitting me in the side, so I'm having to pull back. But back in the day, artillery, if you basically just kited the heavies, your artillery would eventually bring them down. It's not like now, where artillery is not very reliable. Artillery will do significant amounts of damage to these heavy tanks. You just got to find the shell over the ridgeline there, and there you go. Clean shot right into the side of the equal tier American heavy tank. And now, unfortunately, it is me alone against what I think was quite a healthy IS-4, and I'm down to being a one-shot for them, so I have to watch out for that. So what exactly did they nerf on the M48A5 Patton? Actually, we don't have time. We've got to focus on this engagement. Alright, that's an IS-4. Used to be a tier 9 heavy. A couple patches before you see this gameplay in 2012. It was moved up to tier 10. And, yeah, what do you think happens when a slow lumbering heavy tank that gets caught out by two artilleries? This is a tier 7 and a tier 6 arty. And, yeah, I have to admit, I was a little bit of a troll. I put colon D to this poor IS-4, knowing that there's pretty much nothing that he could do. He can't catch me. He's out in the open, and artillery is doing 400 damage a shot. This is old school World of Tanks artillery. Artillery was way more accurate. Artillery hit way harder. The only thing that artillery didn't do is it didn't stun tanks like it does now. But honestly, I would rather have artillery actually dealing damage than annoying with things like stunning. Sure, the stunning can be useful if you want to try and work within the player's stun, for example, so you know if you can pull out, try and spot, or if you know that they're not going to see you at a bigger distance. But all in all, I vastly prefer actually having artillery that deals damage. So I'm quite lucky that the IS-4 missed there. That artillery shell obviously missed and only did 27 damage, but there we go. Ladies and gents, boys and girls, Uncle QuickyBaby picking up 5 kills and hitting 9,000 damage in this tank, although you won't be able to see that in the post-game stats that we see here. Nevertheless, this was a meaty amount of experience, 2,163. Made a huge amount of credits profit considering that I didn't fire any gold because gold was only available for gold back in the day, and we get ourselves a Confederate medal because we damaged 5 other vehicles that we didn't kill that our allies did. So that was 11 different vehicles I hit. Man, this thing was an absolute monster, and while we can't see exactly how much damage I dealt in the game, luckily using this awesome replay program that you can't use anymore because it's not updated, we can see we did over 9,000 damage for that 2,163 base experience. Doesn't look like I was probably running a premium account at the time. That is a monster game of World of Tanks. Alright, so round 2, now we're going to be loading out on El Haloof, and you'll see some funky things, like for example the AMX 1390 being a tier 8 light tank. A lot of people, and also, look how unfair this matchup is. There's a tier 6 light tank against a tier 8 light tank. Oh, this matchmaking's a joke. They've got an E50 versus a T110 E4, so we literally just have an extra tier 10 tank compared to our opponents, and we have an extra tier 8 compared to the tier 6. People complain about the matchmaker now, but I don't think people realize how brutal the matchmaker was back in the day. So we start off this game with a cracking shot into an E50, forcing them back behind their rock, and they don't want to drive out in front of our gun. So, a lot of you, I hope you're enjoying this video, obviously, but a lot of you might be thinking, well, QB, how was this vehicle nerfed? What did they do to the M48A1 Patton in update 8.0? Well, they destroyed the vehicle's gun dispersion from moving and turning by 20%. In addition to this, they made it so the gun bloomed out more by 15%, and also when you turned the turret, it bloomed out more by 40%. So, what they effectively did is they removed 2 vert stabs worth of the dispersion on this tank. So it made it so that you couldn't just snapshot your opponent's left, right, and center. So now it went from probably having like gun rammer, vents, and coated optics to have hyperview range, to now actually having to use vert stabs in the build, which definitely harmed the vehicle's capacity massively. But if that's not enough, they also nerfed the rate of fire by 10%, increasing the rate of fire from, 8 seconds up to 8.8. So that was a huge hit to this tank as well. Do you know one of the funny things about the M48A1 Patton back in the day is it could actually use 3 guns. It could use the 90mm gun, 105mm gun that you'll know from the Patton, and then the real M48A1 gun. And the gun names were the M68, which the tank still has to this day, the T5E1M2, and the M41 gun for the 90mm. And also, if all of that wasn't enough, that they also nerfed the turret reverse speed by only a tiny amount, by 2 degrees. But all of this massively hit the M48. It went from being this be-all, end-all medium tank that I fell in love with. I have to admit, back then, the game was fresh. I'd only been playing it probably for about a year. I was just starting to get up to tier 10, and I didn't care if my tank was balanced. Honestly, I didn't care if my tank was balanced. It's not the same as when you've got 700 different tanks inside the game and you want to play a bunch of them. All I really enjoyed was, frankly, just having an amazing tank and being able to get crazy big damage games and get crazy good amounts of kills in my battles. I didn't really think about the balance of the game, and for that kind of like short period that the tank lasted, that couple of months, it was probably one of my favorite tanks of all time. And I think still to this day, it's still my most played vehicle. I played 500 games in this tank in a short-lived patch that lasted a couple of months, as I said. And yeah, I didn't really think about it being overpowered, even though clearly now, in retrospect, it's outrageously overpowered. It was just now, though, I do care a lot more about the balancing of the game, because there's so many different vehicles, and we've been playing the game for so long that you want to see that you have an opportunity in lots of different vehicles and not just everyone kind of playing the same tank. Because back in the day, it was actually hard to be able to get the tier 10s. It required a lot of grinding and a lot of effort to be able to get there. And so that meant that when Wargaming released a patch and suddenly a tank was incredibly good, that vehicle wasn't accessible by the player base very quickly. Whereas now, when Wargaming buff up vehicles, and listen to that horrible physics, you can't actually push enemies, but you can still damage them by making micro movements. So that when Wargaming release a vehicle now, and it's frankly overpowered, everyone's playing it then almost within the first like week or so, or even a few days, because some people already have the vehicle, some people have got 2 million free experience, so they can get whatever tank they want. And it's just brutal, because now, overpowered vehicles can end up destroying the game really, really quickly, just like the AMX M454 did for a while. Thankfully, Wargaming did react a lot faster than they did with, for example, the Object 268 version 4, And we didn't have to suffer the M454 crushing games for more than, what was it, a few months, right? Unlike the 268 version 4, but it felt like it took Wargaming about 2 years to finally do the right thing with that tank. So back in the day, when a vehicle was OP, it didn't feel that the game was suddenly ruined within the space of a week. Obviously, if the M48 had stayed the way it was, then eventually everybody would have been able to get the vehicle, and the game would have probably just become awful, right? With everybody just playing the same tank and nobody having the variety. What I'm trying to suggest is back in the day when things happened, the time didn't change quite so quickly, and so balancing almost wasn't so important in World of Tanks, and Wargaming could take more time to be able to balance out the vehicles. And all of the tanks that you've seen in this series, that before it was nerfed series, have had their time in the limelight, so to say, right? Like the KV-1S or the T-18, or vehicles like the KV, for example. All of these tanks that I featured in the Before It Was Nerfed series over the years have had times where they would consider to be toxic tanks. I don't think really the M48 was super toxic. It was very good, but I wouldn't really consider it to be like a super toxic tank. Even though I think it was absolutely incredible. Obviously, if I played hundreds and hundreds of games in the vehicle in a short period. Man, these maps look so different. They don't have the high ground there, and oh my word, it's a GWE. That's a tier 8 self-propelled gun. You do not want to be sitting in front of that for very long. And it's got 660 hit points. Luckily for me, they're exposing themselves, but with 660 hit points, I'm not even guaranteed to be able to shut them down in my subsequent shot because I low-rolled. Oh wow, look, a mouse with 3,000 hit points. It was the most healthy tank from the start of the game, and it's still the most healthy tank now. I almost feel like its 3,000 hit points back in the day was way more impressive. And you can see that instead of just loading the gold and going and spamming at the cheeks of the mouse, I am off. I don't want to fight that mouse right now. They're called Rusty Git. Well, hopefully we can manage to deal with their self-propelled guns first. And then after we've dealt with their self-propelled guns, then we can deal with Rusty Git on the battlefield. So unfortunately, I get spotted, might get tagged by the mouse here. I probably should have kept driving forwards. Yeah, I'd take a big old hit from the mouse. Those sounds are so different. And wow, looks like we found a nest of pigs. A T-92 with 630 hit points, and trust me, if that T-92 hits me, I am not going to be able to do anything more in this game. We've destroyed, what is it, 1 artillery so far, maybe 2 artillery. Who's counting anyway? No, I think it was 1 because the AMX-50B finished off the GW type, the GWE. It's so weird seeing the tank names different. I have to like double take for a second and think like, do I know how to actually say these tank names anymore? Oh man, a T-52, the little tier 6 appears behind me, but that's all she's going to write for the T-52, as it just feels like another free kill for me. Man, that T-52, what an old school tank. It used to have, I think, 440 meters view range or 420 meters view range at tier 5. Oh my gosh, did I say earlier that it was a tier 6? I stand corrected, it's a tier 5. They had a tier 5 light tank against a tier 8 auto-loading light tank on our team. How unfair was the matchmaker back in the day? So it's always interesting for me that a lot of people reminisce and they have that nostalgic feel about old school World of Tanks. But people don't realize about the truly toxic things there were in the game. It was quite nice in a way that everybody's not spamming gold. This was the last patch where gold wasn't available for credits. So the very next patch, 8.0, I believe gold was available for credits. Although I might be mistaken there. I think that's when it happened. I think that's when it happened, when the British medium tanks and heavy tanks came into the game. I could be mistaken though. But that just changed the game astronomically. The game was never the same after that, for better or for worse. I think all in all for better, because it did take the pay to win out. But honestly, before they made gold rounds available for credits, outside of Clan Wars, players weren't really firing that many of them. But from a balancing perspective, the fact that some clans that had land on the map could afford to pay their players gold, that then they used them to win other Clan Wars games, that was pretty unbalanced from a competitive perspective. So the game is way better now because of it. Look at this, the IS-7, who I managed to finish off, says Lucka, and I go, yeah, right. In true Uncle Scrubby Baby fashion. Then I was in my mid to early 20s. QQQ, where am I now? Mid 30s. I can still say 36s, mid 30s. Well, the T-52 as well, who also died in this game, says, well, 6-star guys. Yeah, it happens. And also, take a moment to appreciate that we don't have a med kit. I'm not just standing there, not healing my driver because I don't like him. I'm not healing my driver because med kits and repair kits and fire extinguishers were a one-use kind of thing. So later on in the battle, it was pretty ugly when you had to drive around, often with dead crew members or being ammo-racked or everything. Wild stuff in World of Tanks. And this thing was an absolute monster of the battlefield. So 9 kills here. That manages to get us a Top Gun. I'm not sure if it actually showed the epic medals. I think the epic medals were only shown in the garage, because I believe that would have been a Bolter's medal, which was the predecessor to the Radley Walters medal. Originally, the most kills that you got in World of Tanks for an epic medal was 7, and then they added in the Pools medal and the Rezene Heroes medal for 10 and 14 respectively. And they bumped up the requirements to get the Bolter's medal, which became the Radley Walters medal, to 8. This is still a Top Gun. We managed to get ourselves 10,000 experience for a 5 times game. I was pretty darn happy about that. And still to this day, probably one of the highest kill counts I got in the M48. And no surprise, considering that I played pretty much a third of all the games that I've ever played in the Patton the first 2 months that it was out for the subsequent 13 years. So unsurprisingly, an ace tanker here, and we managed to pick ourselves up over 7,000 damage for those 9 kills. That's a lot back in the day. Even with the artillery having extra hit points, these are still massive games that most players wouldn't start to dream of. For years, until World of Tanks became, should we say, played more seriously. And that's really what World of Tanks was like back in the day. It was like the Wild West. It wasn't really refined. It wasn't really varnished or polished. There were some horrible aspects about the game, and everyone had terrible computers, terrible connections, trackball mice, awful keyboards. Nobody really was playing the game professionally. It was definitely a different vibe, and a lot of things were better, but also a lot of things were worse. But one thing's for certain, there's a reason why I played the M48A1 Patton about 500 times in 50 days, and that's because those were the 50 best days for this tank in the history of the game before it was brutally nerfed in the subsequent patch. Although, quite rightly nerfed. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was a trip down memory lane to look at the M48A1 Patton. I really hope you enjoyed this and enjoyed seeing some of my monster games for 2012. If you did and you want to see more of these videos, because they take me a long time to do to get the replays working, then make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it goes live, I'm going live on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby to help you get more QB commanders. So come along, get me inside the game. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon. And let me know in the comments down below whether you were lucky enough to play the M48A1 Patton back in the day, and did you love it as much as I did?